you're arrested for DUI in Illinois and you know you have a statutory summary suspension of your driving privileges on the way, and you want to know, can you get a work permit to drive at least for work during that time? Hi, I'm Steve Fagan from the law firm of Fagan, Fagan & Davis, a criminal DUI and traffic defense firm here in the Chicago area. We defend people facing DUI charges all the time, and that's a very common question. Come on in, join me for a moment while we talk about it. Unfortunately, the short answer is no. Years ago, there was a law in Illinois that allowed something called a JDP, or Judicial Driving Permit. Now that permit allowed driving during part of the suspension for certain reasons and certain reasons only. Those reasons included education, if you were enrolled in an accredited college, medical, if you had medical care needs or someone that you were responsible for had medical needs that required driving, or of course work. Now there were other restrictions such as geographical restrictions. Judges could restrict you to a certain route to and from. They could restrict you to and from work, or they could allow you to drive during work for purposes of work. But this was a fairly well restricted permit, but you could get a permit for a specific reason. That type of permit no longer exists. It's been replaced by something different called an MDDP, or Monitoring Device Driving Permit. This type of permit is a lot like the old JDP system in some ways and very different in others. Just like the old Judicial Driving Permit, it's only valid after the first 30 days of the suspension has elapsed. Unlike the Judicial Driving Permit, you don't go to the court for the permit. You can get it directly from the Secretary of State, and there isn't a hearing to determine whether a judge wants to give you the permit and is agreeable to giving you the permit. The only issue is whether you're legally eligible for the permit. Also, unlike the Judicial Driving Permit, generally this type of permit, an MDDP for short, generally requires a BAIID. More alphabet soup. A BAIID is short for Breath, Alcohol, Ignition, Interlock Device. BAIID is much shorter. And what that means is a breath machine that's installed in your car. Also, unlike a Judicial Driving Permit, there are costs. Where a Judicial Driving Permit really didn't cost you, the motorist, anything, an MDDP does. There are costs that you pay to the Secretary of State, and there are costs you pay for the installation and maintenance of the device itself. And sometimes those costs can be defrayed, but there are costs that are there. Also, unlike the Judicial Driving Permit, the MDDP is not necessarily geographically restricted to a particular route or a radius. If you're leaving the state of Illinois, in fact, you can arrange that with the Secretary of State. And so the geographical limitations don't really apply the same way that they did with a Judicial Driving Permit. Also, unlike a Judicial Driving Permit, the reason that you want to go out and drive doesn't matter. You want to go out and get ice cream at 2 in the morning, you can. You want to go out and get cigarettes, you can. There's no restriction. With a Judicial Driving Permit, you couldn't even go shop and get groceries. With this kind of a permit, an MDDP, you certainly can. You can go get groceries if you like. No one's going to have a problem with that. You just have to use the machine that's installed, and you have to comply with the other terms of the MDDP. So in some ways, the MDDP is a better fit for some people. There are some expenses, but it's still cheaper than getting a cab everywhere you want to go. Many people don't want the MDDP, and that's okay. You can opt out. Just be aware that that creates certain other possible legal penalties for you that wouldn't exist if you did have the MDDP, and you just can't drive if you don't have this type of a permit. Finally, in certain circumstances, in certain work settings, it is possible to get a waiver for the Breath, Alcohol, Ignition, Interlock Device, or BAIID, and that's something you really should speak to an attorney about to determine whether that's appropriate in your situation and that's something you really want to do. So, short answer, no, there's no work permit during a statutory summary suspension anymore in the form of a JDP, but there is this MDDP that's out there, and for many people it's a great option. Thanks for joining me. My name's Steve Fagan from the law firm of Fagan, Fagan & Davis, a DUI defense firm here in the Chicago area. If you are facing DUI charges here in Cook, Lake, or DuPage County, Illinois, pick up the phone, call the number on your screen, and we'll be happy to talk to you. Talk to our friendly staff. They'll be happy to schedule a time for us to speak in depth about how we can help you.